Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Today is Saturday, January 7th, 2023. And I want to begin by saying thank you so much for agreeing to participate in this oral history project that we have called the A. Grace Lee Mims Arts and
Oh,
Culture Oral History Project.
beautiful.
A great artist, great founding member of the African American Archives Auxiliary of the Western Reserve Historical Society, and great talent as far as radio broadcasting is concerned. And I think she would be proud to know that I'm having this conversation with you because your incredible sister was one of her former students. So thank you for saying yes to us. In addition to using this material for the Western Reserve Historical Society and adding your story to our digital archives at the library at the Historical Society, we also want to use some of what you say to inform a story that I'm writing for The Real Deal Press, edited by Mr. Richard Andrews, also a Clevelander and one of your biggest fans, I'd have to say it that way. So I'll just go ahead then and start to ask the questions because you already have all the answers. This is your life story. Would you please begin by stating your name and your affiliations?
My name is Sherrie Tolliver, and my primary affiliation is with a group called Women in History, which is a group of women in Northeast Ohio that presents living history characterizations of American women. And I'm an alumna of Caramoo Theater. 3 generations of my family have been affiliated with Caramoo, so I would like to state that as well.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your name and affiliations. And just for the record, since people won't be able to see our screen names, I want to say my name is Regina Williams. And when they listen to this audio, they'll know both parties who are part of this oral history dialogue. And beyond this initial introduction, if you could please answer this next set of questions, which talks about your family life. Can you tell us a little bit about your early life, your parents' names, where you were born, where you grew up, and the schools that you attended?
Oh, I'll probably have to ask for reminders of the sequence of questions, but I'm a native Clevelander, 2nd generation Clevelander. Both my parents were born here. Stanley Tolliver Sr. and Dorothy Olivia Greenwood Tolliver. I grew up in the University Circle neighborhood that borders Glenville, Huff, and Murray Hill. My father called it Huff Heights. I guess now I don't know. It's between Glenville and University Circle. It was kind of its own neighborhood. And I'm actually writing a book about the history of that because it was a very unique neighborhood in Cleveland. But I went to Doane Elementary School on East 105th Street near Superior, which is now a senior residence building. It's a beautiful historic building, and I'm glad it was preserved. I went to Lutheran East High School in Cleveland Heights. I graduated from New York University, Tisch School of the Arts with a BFA in theater. And okay, what else was in the question? I'll tell you about my early life.
Yes.
My parents, as I said, were native Clevelanders, and they bought the house on Wade Park because it was so close to University Circle, and they wanted us to participate in all the amenities that the area offered. So we were members of every single institution in University Circle: the History Museum, the Art Museum, the Historical Society, the Natural History Museum. It used to be the Garden Center, now it's the Botanical Garden. And all of those institutions, and the Cleveland Institute of Music and the Cleveland Music School Settlement. And so I took classes and went on trips to all of those institutions on a regular basis. They were the other half of my education, whether I was studying dance, cello, art, natural history, Cleveland history. Uh, every Saturday or during the week, I was at one of those institutions taking classes. So they made me who I am. Those are the things I still love and still do as a profession: history, music, theater, and the arts. So that came from them also because both of them were trained musicians. My mother was a pianist and a vocalist, and she did some postgraduate work at Juilliard School of Music in New York. And my father was an athlete, but when he wasn't able to run track anymore because he injured his leg, he was accepted into he was at Baldwin Wallace College, but his scholarship was changed from an athletic scholarship to a musical scholarship. And he was able to sing and study music at the Baldwin Wallace Conservatory. So that's how they met, because they were both musicians, and they met at Caramel House. So in a production of Carmen Jones. So I am the way I am because that's I didn't have much choice. My brother we call him the white sheep of the family because he didn't go into the arts at all, but he still has a deep appreciation for them.
Well, thank you for letting us know that you were not an only child.
Oh,
I
no.
knew that because I know a little bit about your background, but I'm wondering if you wouldn't mind, for the record, stating the names of your siblings and telling us a little bit about how they fared. We know that your brother was not a musician or an artist, a performing artist of any type, but tell us a little bit about your siblings who are coming of age in that culturally enriched household of yours near University Circle.
Okay. Well, I have an older sister who's deceased now. She was a year older than me, Stephanie Tolliver, who was also an actress and a musician and a dancer. She was a wonderful dancer. And she was also a lay minister who was pursuing a degree in theology, but unfortunately her life was cut short by her about her breast cancer. She was also a community activist, and she was in a group called Women Speak Out for Peace and Justice, and was very active in community work such as getting former felons to register to vote, speaking out against nuclear arms race, speaking out against mass incarceration, and being very active in those activist circles who were trying to make change, positive social change. She was selected to be a delegate to the UN conference against racism, I guess you would say, not for racism, on racism, in Cape Town, South Africa, in 2001. And she's very, very missed. My brother studied the trumpet. Was it trumpet? No, flute. He played the flute, but he's the scientist in the family. So that's why I say he's the white sheep of the family. He went into biology and computer programming and coding and all that stuff that I know nothing about. So.
And what is his name again, please?
His name is Stanley Tolliver Jr., and he's married and has a beautiful family in Bowie, Maryland.
Okay, thank you so much. And can you tell me, please, here again, there's a danger in thinking you know someone's background when you're conducting an interview, but I'm going to ask for the benefit of our listeners, how long did you live in the city of Cleveland?
I lived in the city of Cleveland in the same house that we moved into when I was 6 months old until I was 62 years old. So I lived in that house my whole life until I got married and moved to Raleigh, North Carolina.
Okay. And are you currently residing in Raleigh?
Yes. but my heart is in Cleveland.
Okay. Thank you so much. And again, your fans are in Cleveland too, at least a large number of them. So thank you again for sharing this story with us. Um, you said both of your parents were native Clevelanders, but
Mm-hmm.
do you know what attracted their parents to this part of the country?
Yes, I do. It's very interesting. It's like when I, it's like a Louis Gates documentary. My paternal grandfather and his wife moved here for two reasons. Well, they all moved here for the same reason, to escape the deprivation and violence of the South. They moved here in the my grandparents moved here in 1919 and 1921, I think. One family, my mother's family moved here in 1919, I think, and my father's family, I think, moved in 1921. In my father's case, his parents moved here because they said they had moved from Louisiana to Texas, and they said that my grandmother said it was too hot down there, and what she was talking about was the Ku Klux Klan and all the lynching that was going on. And my grandfather, the other reason was he wanted to vote. He was a veteran, and he said, "I've served my country. I wear the uniform of this country. I should be able to vote and be a part of the constituents of this country and have my vote count and my voice heard." So they moved to Cleveland to get away from racism and to vote, which racism was preventing them from voting. And then my mother's family, pretty much the same story. They found out, I'm sorry, my grandmother's sister, kind of like the scene in Color Purple where Miss Sophia sasses the mayor's wife. She sassed the white man, and he threatened to make her pay for her uppityness. And her family put her in a wagon and drove her to the next town and put her on a train to come north so that she would not be, God only knows what fate would have befallen her, because she wasn't going to back down. The Smith women didn't back down. Mm-hmm. So she ended up in Cleveland first, and she wrote back and told her family about all the opportunities here. So my grandfather, who was also a veteran, moved up here because he had some training, I think, from Tuskegee Institute, and he wasn't able to get a job in Alabama doing what he could do. And so he came here to get a job, and he was one of the first Black engineers to work at Cleveland Illuminating Electric Company. He might have been the first, if not the first, the second, and they were the only two for a long time. But he moved up here because the opportunities were greater. And they got married at Shiloh Baptist Church in December of 1919.
Well, thank you so much. And again, you've already shared that you're writing a book about your family's history. Mm-hmm. And may I ask, in this narrative that you're constructing, mm-hmm. On behalf of those family members who have joined the ancestors, are you suggesting that it's part of the Great Migration?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely. They definitely were a part of the Great Migration, and for all the reasons that people might know or not know, because of racism, because of segregation, because of poor job opportunities, because of poor educational opportunities, because the schools were non-existent or segregated and very, very poorly supplied. I know my grandparents, my mother's parents, also raised a nephew that came up because his mother wanted him to have an education, and he wasn't going to get one in Alabama, not the kind that she wanted him to have, to go to high school and then on to college. So I mean, people were able to go to school and go to college in the South, but it was really, really hard. Mm-hmm. And if you were from a small town, there was one school for Black students with one teacher most of the time, and it only went to the 8th grade. And And the racism was so designed that the law said you could only vote if you had a high school diploma. So if there's no high schools, guess what? Black people can't vote. So it was all designed to perpetuate oppression, and they moved north, like millions of other Black people, to escape at least that form of racism and segregation.
Thank you so much for answering that question. And I raised it because the periodization is sometimes interesting in those studies of the Great Migration. And people will say, you know, World War I or the Great War, post-war migration. But again, with your grandparents being here in the 19 teens and early 1920s, it is sort of World War I, you know, and immediately following. But again, not the typical, and I'm doing the quotes in the air, right, for the people who don't feel to factory migration, because you've talked about that education. It's not the cotton plant, also, you know, in the fields that has to be harvested, but something else that's driving this migration.
No, the interesting thing about having two parents born in Cleveland was most of my peers had family that had moved here from, their parents had moved here from the South. And so they still had connections to the South. And I didn't, because my whole family was already here. And I just remember listening ruefully to all my friends saying, "We going to Alabama, we going to Tennessee for the summer, we're going to stay on our grandparents." And I'm like, my grandparents live around the corner. When am I going to get to go stay on a farm or go, you know, on a long trip to go visit family? It never happened because they were all in Cleveland. So yeah, it was interesting. But they were both veterans, and I think that also put more fire in them to leave, because they had, after serving, the backlash against Black soldiers in the South was so horrendous that Black men were being lynched simply for wearing their uniforms in public, because the South just would not recognize African American men, as citizens, as being able, having the right to bear arms. And so I think that was another motivating factor, was just after serving in the Army and seeing what instead of a grateful nation, they got more hostility for asserting themselves as American citizens. So I think, them moving right after World War I there was a huge backlash, and a lot of riots across the country after World War I, because of Black men having served and gone, a lot of them having gone overseas and seen and lived in a situation where there was no segregation and they were treated like human beings.
Yes. And may I ask, in the writing of your family's history, are you relying primarily on your personal and other relatives' archives, or are there other collections that will also inform this book?
Gosh, it all kind of mixes together. Partly because my mother had when she opened it in 1962, no, it must have been 64. It was called a Negro History bookstore, because that's what it was called. And she opened it to help people get resources for Negro History Week. For those of you who don't know, it wasn't always Black History Month, it was Negro History Week, which was started by, of course, I can't think of his name, but Carter G. Woodson. Carter G. Woodson. Right, and the week was selected because Frederick Douglass and Lincoln had the same birthday week in February, and so they decided to designate it as a week to highlight and study Black achievement. And not just for the week, but my understanding is originally it was that they would pick a topic and explore it during that week, and then the whole year they would continue to study it, and the next year they would present what they had studied that whole year. So it wasn't a week, it wasn't a month, it was 365. The culmination was during the week. So since those things were always available to me, I already knew about the Great Migration, and I already knew about World War I and what happened afterwards. And so all of that stuff I learned growing up, even though it wasn't taught in school, because we had the books at home that my mother had purchased for the school. for her bookstore. And so I don't know where one begins and one ends at this point, because it just was all a part of my education, starting from having a Color Me Brown coloring book that, you know, was like shocking. You know, when I was in school, we literally were afraid to draw people brown because we never saw anybody brown in a book. But this coloring book comes along and says, yes, make the people brown. And it literally was like permission to be yourself. And those are the little things that segregation does and racism does to even children's mentalities, looking back on it. So that was very special. And I was really, really blessed and fortunate to have a family that recognized that these were issues that needed to be addressed in a positive way.
Well, let me thank you. This isn't part of the script for the question, but let me thank you for mentioning the work of Dr. Carter G. Woodson and the roots of Negro History Week and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History and the Journal of Negro History. And
I'm a member.
Yes.
Oh, you can put that in my affiliations too, because I'm a member.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, but all the things that he did, not just in February,
right,
but
all year.
So again, very important point, and not one that I had addressed in my questioning here. But I want to say also, because I can't ask you the second half of this question, why have you chosen to remain in Greater Cleveland?
Yeah.
Change it up a little bit. Why have you chosen to leave your heart in Greater Cleveland now that you're living in North Carolina, which is an incredible place to be in the world as well?
Yeah, North Carolina has amazing history. But as I said earlier, my whole upbringing was about Cleveland and what was there and what I got from it. And nothing here can replace that at age 66. It's just not going to. And so by being a third generation Clevelander, it just, you can't take that out of me. You know, I bleed orange and brown. and wine and gold, you know, so yeah.
And may I say, thank you for smiling, number one. May I say, in case some of our listeners are not sports fans, tell us what the orange and brown and the maroon and gold or wine and gold refer to.
The Cleveland Browns and the Cleveland Cavaliers and the Cleveland Guardians, because my father faithfully took us to games for all three sports teams. That was part of growing up too, was going to the game with the family.
Mm-hmm. You know,
and the hockey team. We used to go to the Barons games too, and we'd be the only Black people there, but we would go.
Okay, thank you. And thank you for sharing detailed information about Mrs. Tolliver, because I must admit, I've never had a conversation with your mother, but I know this about Mr. and Mrs. Tolliver. Mr. Tolliver seemed always to be singing, and Mrs. Tolliver always accompanied him on the piano. But can you tell us a little bit, thank you for mentioning Juilliard and your mother's advanced studies there and the bookstore, but can you tell a little bit more, if you would please, about Mr. Tolliver's public career here in Greater Cleveland?
Okay. My father, Stanley Tolliver, was an attorney. His focus was civil rights and defending African Americans against a very racist police and judicial system. And I was surprised, Regina, when you had that article about him charging the police with police brutality in the 1950s. I didn't even know that it went back that far. You know, that was before my time. And he and Norman Minor being at the forefront of that, as far as I know, maybe people had done it before them because we don't know these stories, but I didn't know that story until you you put it in the display case. I knew about the 60s because I was alive and, you know, I saw it on TV and I heard about it, but I didn't, and I knew that it wasn't a new thing. Let me not sound like I'm naive. I knew police brutality was something that started during slavery, but I did not know that he and Norman Minor were taking the police to court in the 1950s. And I was like, whoa, my dad, you know. But he, you know, his clientele was just ordinary Black members of the community. You know, he wasn't a corporate lawyer. He wasn't he called himself the ghetto lawyer. And then Arthur Woods persuaded him to change it to the people's lawyer because she said, you don't want to sound like you're a ghetto lawyer. But he was saying that his heart was with the people, that his clients many times were uneducated, poor people that could not pay him what other lawyers would charge for the same service. And he would prorate his services to accommodate them because he knew that if he didn't represent them, they were going to get a raw deal. They were going to get convicted of things that they hadn't done, or they would get more time than the crime merited because they were Black. It was really that simple. And so he was very highly esteemed for that service. And there was a lot of gratitude and appreciation, which still makes me verklempt all these years later, remembering it. Yeah, he was very active in several organizations, CORE, the Congress of Racial Equality, and the United Freedom Movement in the 60s. He was their appointed designated legal representative. And many a night the phone would ring and somebody would call and say, you know, so-and-so got arrested today at a demonstration, can you get him out of jail? When people were protesting the segregation in Cleveland schools in the 50s, when there was a boycott of McDonald's because they wouldn't let Black businessmen buy franchises, he was their representative. So many incidents. So after the schools were desegregated, he was on the Welcome Committee, I believe. He and Louis Stokes and some other people that were trying to bridge the West Side and East Side and ease the tensions about busing. And then he ran for the school board and served on the school board for 12 years and was the president twice of the Cleveland School Board. He was president of Norman Minor Bar Association. He was a lifelong member of the NAACP and received, I can't think of the name of the award. He received an award for his service to the NAACP. He was in the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, the National Association of Black Lawyers, who started a law school in Chicago, and unfortunately it didn't stay open very long, but the president of the National Association of Black Lawyers was and may still be Lennox Hines, who was Akata Shakur's lawyer. So he had a very long and committed career to making sure that African Americans in Cleveland particularly got justice in the legal system, and were just leveling the playing field when he was on the board to make sure that they hired Black contractors, that the schools acknowledged and recognized the contributions that African Americans made, and that would be part of the curriculum, those kind of things. He had represented Don Freeman when he was a teacher, because he got literally fired for teaching Black history in school. That was one of the reasons. And as that was part of the kind of like that, all my mother opening the bookstore and all that kind of tied together, of introducing those things and making a platform for the validity of those things.
But I do want to ask just a follow-up question, and thank you for sharing the information about your father's involvement in civil rights activism and school desegregation and doing other things that impacted learning here on America's North Coast. But there is a picture of the ghetto people's lawyer sitting at a table with other activists. And usually there's a caption that says something about the ghetto grand jury. And since this picture gets used so much in publications here in Greater Cleveland, can you tell us a little bit about that picture and what chapter in Mr. Tolliver's history it's illustrating?
Okay, that picture was taken in 1967. I believe it was June of 1967. And Martin Luther King was in Cleveland because he had started his northern leg of his campaign against racism and poverty and segregation. And Carl Stokes was running for mayor. And even though Carl Stokes did not want to appear to be, I don't know how to word this, but he shied away from being connected to King visibly or philosophically or whatever, because there was a concern that would alienate white voters. But Dr. King came anyway, because whoever stopped him from doing what he wanted to do, and was very active in getting young people involved in voter recruitment and just promoting Black self-love and Black empowerment in Cleveland and wherever he went at that point. And so this was a year after the Huff Rebellion, where in Huff, there was, the National Guard had to be called in because of the firebombing, and several people died. And so the court's grand jury came to the conclusion that it was caused by outside agitators, and that there was really no problem, that it was all the fault of outside agitators, and completely ignored all the issues that were negatively impacting the residents of Huff, which caused it to ignite and go up in flames because of people's frustration with really poor housing, overcrowding, poor schools, unemployment. The neighborhood was neglected by the sanitation department, so there was garbage, there was, the apartments were cut up into tenements, so you had 10 people living in living quarters that were designed for maybe 2 families. There were 10 families living there. And so the conditions were really horrendous, and the city was ignoring it, and that's why it erupted. And then they literally whitewashed it and said that it was an unfortunate series of events that was provoked by outside agitators. So they decided to have their own grand jury and have the residents of Huff meet there. The meeting was at Greater Avery AME Church on 82nd maybe and Wade Park. I'm not sure exactly what the address was. 86th and I think 82nd and Wade Park. And Dr. King was there. And in the picture is also Lewis Robinson, who was the organizer of the JFK House on Superior. And he had a rifle club. And during the quote riot, he was beaten up and jailed by the police. And several of the other, it was a gathering place for young people to learn Black history, to study. It was kind of like for lack of a better word, a YMCA for young Black people. Someplace they could come and gather, but there was also a rifle club, which of course did not sit well with the powers that be. So they accused him of being a communist, blah, blah, blah. Locked him up several times. But he's sitting at the table, and Ahmed Evans is sitting on the other side of Dad, on the other side of Martin King. And my father introduced Ahmed to Martin Luther King because he was Ahmed's lawyer, because Ahmed was a quote extremist and Black nationalist who was kind of a social pariah to the more moderate middle class Black who were slowly becoming involved in the civil rights movement, because a lot of them thought that Dr. King was too radical, let alone Ahmed Evans. But they're all sitting at the table taking testimony from people who lived in Huff and who witnessed the riots and what the conditions were like there, including the wife of Henry Towns, who was arrested for trying to get his family out of the area, and she was shot. Her child was shot by the police because they were trying to leave when the police were telling people they couldn't leave, even though the neighborhood was going up in flames, and the man was trying to get his family to safety. So they took testimony from these people and came up with their own conclusion about what was going on. And that plus the organization to desegregate the schools created this Black power base in Cleveland that was able to elect Carl Stokes mayor. That was a period when this activism became consolidated and people decided to vote and to advocate for change and to demand change. And one of the changes was electing the first Black mayor of a major city.
Okay, well, thank you so much again for centering your childhood, in the heyday of the civil rights movement.
Yeah.
And since you told your age, now I know, in imagining the timeline, that in the midst of all of this, you're in the eye of the storm here in Cleveland with your activist attorney dad and your education and music loving mother with a bookstore, the Negro bookstore, Negro history bookstore, that you're in the eye of the storm there, and they've got various weapons at their disposal, to fight, this effort to keep certain information, out of the minds, perhaps, of African Americans. But there is time for the arts. So I was asked, as a child coming of age in that decade, can you tell us a little bit about your introduction to the arts?
It started from the cradle. My mom would sing to us. She would play the piano for us. We had an amazing record collection. She bought children's records for us. My sister and I wore Peter Pan out to the record. The needle just skidded across the record. We just wore it out. But we listened to everything: jazz, gospel, R&B, blues, classical, everything, every day. That was just, music was a part of every day. Then as far as, my mother took us to the ballet and she took us to the theater. So I immediately fell in love with the ballerinas and decided I wanted to be one. So that's what led to the ballet lessons. And the music lessons was, both your parents are musicians, you're going to take music lessons. So took piano, studied cello with the late Mr. Donald White, who was the first Black cellist in the Cleveland Orchestra. Studied piano with Leona Apple, who was the mother of Natalie Henderis, African-American concert pianist, who lived in Glenville. Both of them lived in fact, I think Mrs. Apple lived across the street from Donald White in Glenville, right off of East Boulevard by Rockefeller Park, by the Cultural Garden. So those were my first two music teachers. The art lessons, we every Saturday, my sister and I walked to the art museum. We walked to the Institute of Music and took Dalcroze, which was like a Eurythmics sort of dance and theory mixed together technique. We went to nursery school at the Cleveland Musical Settlement and took music appreciation there, took theory there. We're in the young naturalist classes at the Natural History Museum, history classes at the Historical Society. So uh, interestingly enough, we didn't, my brother took classes at Caramel. We didn't take any classes at Caramel. I think because my mother just didn't want to drive on Saturday because she'd worked all week. So we could walk by ourselves to go to to go to the stuff in University Circle. And like I said, that's why they moved there, so that we could walk to all those things and enjoy them. And you know, it was a different time. I could get on the bus and go by myself to dance class downtown, which I shudder to think now of an 8-year-old getting on the bus and going someplace by themselves. But children are still doing that. I've seen children get on the bus early in the morning in the dark in Cleveland to get on the bus to go to school. So, you know, my prayers are with them. But it was a lot safer, you know, when I was doing that.
Well, thank you so much. You've shared already a very rich history of the arts community here in the city of Cleveland, even during the heyday of the civil rights movement. And I heard you say it was a lot safer, even
Yeah,
though those threats were real, that you felt
yeah,
safe,
yeah,
in your own community.
yeah, definitely felt safe. We would sleep with the screen doors, just the screen door locked in the summertime, so, because it was hot. Nobody ever bothered us. Uh, it was a very idyllic childhood. um, um, I don't know what else to say. It was, we had great neighbors, uh, who were, you know, it was a great childhood, and I wouldn't trade it for anything.
Okay. And may I ask, before we move on to the next question, just a couple of the names that you mentioned so that we can
Uh,
cross-reference various
uh,
sources at the Historical Society.
oh yeah, okay.
Arthur Wood.
Arthur Woods, councilwoman, boxing manager, charm school proprietor, and just an amazing, one of the first Black women to work at Ohio Bell, uh, and just left a huge mark on Cleveland. There's a street named after her and a park named after her. After my mother passed, she and my dad became companions, and she was just a great lady, and I miss her. I miss her. She accomplished she had a cotillion for, I don't, for girls in the city who normally would not have access to that sort of activity, called the Starlight Cotillion. And every year she would have the girls do community service and take classes, and then they would attend this cotillion. I know one year it was at Severance Hall. Um, it was just a beautiful gesture of giving back to the community. One of many things that she did for the community. Many things. That's a whole nother movie and a whole nother book talking about Arthur Woods.
Mhm. Okay, thank you. And certainly thank you for mentioning the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. in the season of so many celebrations that will honor him with that January 15th birthday. There's going to be a big concert, of course, at Severance
Yeah.
Hall, and then throughout the week and probably the rest of January 2023. But you, in addition to Dr. King, also mentioned Louis Stokes.
Yeah.
And just in case there's somebody who doesn't know the history of the Stokes brothers, could you just say a little bit about them?
Yeah, Louis Stokes and Carl Stokes grew up in the same neighborhood as my father, so they've known each other since they were young. I think Louis and my dad were in law school at the same time, but I don't know if he went to Marshall Law School or not. I'm not sure, but they knew each other from the central neighborhood. And Louis Stokes went on to be elected U.S. Congressman, but Carl Stokes, of course, was his younger brother, first African-American mayor of a major city. He was elected in '67, and went on to become a broadcast journalist and a judge, I believe. Was he a judge? I think he was a judge, and then a broadcast journalist, and then Lewis, as congressman, appointed him ambassador to the Seychelles. It's great to have brothers in high places, huh? That was a plum job. And of course, now there are a dozen buildings in the Cleveland area named for either of them or both of them. The Carl Stokes Federal Courthouse, the Lewis Stokes wing of the Public Library downtown, the Lewis Stokes wing of the VA Hospital and University Circle. I believe there's a Lewis, is it Lewis and Carl Stokes RTA stop in East Cleveland, Lewis and Carl Stokes Head Start program. They have several buildings, Head Start facilities named after them. So that's what I can think of. I know there's more things that are named after them. The Stokes Boulevard. There's a Stokes Boulevard. So.
Well, thank you again for giving the rest of the world, little who's who of Black Cleveland history here, and all of the or some of the men and women who are moving in the same circles as your parents in the 1960s, before and beyond that decade as well. But and I also want to say, because I have the pleasure and the great honor of interviewing Mr. Tolliver for the History Makers Oral History Project based in Chicago. And because Cleveland Public Library subscribes to that database, I just want to mention that collection. So when the students listen to your narrative and it piques their curiosity about the ghetto people's lawyer, they can go back and hear his voice and hear that in-depth interview for the History Makers. It was just incredible. Now, with that introduction to the arts from the cradle, and ongoing, and then ending up at NYU, I think I'm getting jealous here, and then coming back to Cleveland, I want to ask, as a young adult, do you consider yourself to be an artist after NYU, a teacher, or are you a teaching artist, in your young adult years?
I was a teaching artist, and I still am. I consider myself a teaching artist, because, gosh, there was no point in me learning all this stuff if I wasn't going to share it with people. That's the way I look at it, and because people taught me, and those experiences were so impactful and so. I grew so much from them that I wanted to be able to pay it forward and do that for someone else. I knew that the arts can reach students that sometimes traditional classroom doesn't reach. The arts can open up a student's mind to think differently, to think creatively, and have that validated, and instead of just trying to memorize facts to pass the test, you can think about what it is you're learning in a more universal way, a more holistic way, I think, so that history and music and art aren't just things that are up on walls that other people do in buildings that you have to pay to go see, or theaters that you have to pay to sit in the seat. It's something you can create yourself. And you like, I can't think who said it, but children sing before they talk, and they dance before they walk. And so it's in all of us to be creative and artistic. We just, because of money, basically, it gets compartmentalized into a job and a set of skills that you get paid for. And so if you don't do it at this level, then what you're doing isn't really art. You're not really dancing. That's not real dance. That's not real singing, but it is. And self-expression is universal and timeless and should be a part of education. And when the arts being taken out of school is a very bad idea. So anytime I can put it back in school, even if, as a living history performer, or as a the drama teacher or as a choreographer for the school play, whatever it is, you just see the children blossom in a way that is it enhances their life. Whether they go on to become a professional dancer is unimportant. When light comes out of someone, that's what education is for. So
Thank you. And if you don't mind, can you just do sort of a then and now comparison, when you begin to teach as an artist and contrast that with what you're doing now in teaching through the arts?
oh, um, wow, I don't know. I don't really think it's changed that much. Since I'm older, I think I'm a little more patient. I've learned that everybody doesn't learn the same way, and so there's no cookie cutter approach to working with students. That you meet them where they are, and that you want them to know that you are learning from them just as much as they're learning from you, that it's not a one-way, it's not a monologue, it's a dialogue, it's a sharing. That I guess now that I'm older, it's just more important to me to make sure that my students understand that they have something beautiful that they can share with the world, whether it's professional or not, whether it's perfect or not. Their artistry is valid and worthy of them expressing it, and not thinking it's not good enough because it's not like somebody else's. There's the professional arts world, but there's also just the beauty of self-expression. If you're in a quilting club, or you're in a book club and you act out the stuff in the books, whatever it is, in your church doing liturgical dance or singing, or to make room for those things in your life, and not let the judgment part that so many artists as professionals we have to deal with, because we're competing and we want to get paid. But the soul of being an artist is something that you have, and it's your right, and you should always nurture it and honor it, whether it becomes your profession or not.
When you made the decision to focus on the history and combine that with the acting, because it seems
Mhm.
to me, and again, I'm finding out all kinds of new things today, but it seems to me that's what you've done with
Mhm.
women in history. So
Mhm.
was the music left behind, or is there a way to integrate both the music and all the other experiences you've had with the history lessons and the acting?
Sometimes I use music in my performances if I'm doing something about the civil rights, like Rosa Parks, or uh, the music was a huge part of the civil rights movement in the South. With the Sweet Honey in the Rock grew out of that, Bernice Reagan. So we sing "Ain't Gonna Let Nobody Turn Me Round." If I'm doing Harriet Tubman, spirituals were a huge part of the Underground Railroad. So we do "Swing Low, Sweet Chariot" or "Wade in the Water." Um, uh, uh, I'm working on doing Marian Anderson, who my sister did and did beautifully. And I'm going to sing, but because I do sing, I've sung in choirs my whole life. But I don't sing like she sang or like my mother and my dad sang. But I'm working on that because um, I'm going to sing he had the whole, what is it? He has a whole world in his hands. That's a simple song that I can sing to present Marian Anderson and have the audience participate. And so the music is still part of it. I asked my husband and I are both music lovers, so music is always playing in the house. We're always going to concerts. like I said, even if you don't do it yourself, loving it and appreciating it enriches your life. And if you know about it, then you can appreciate it more. So that's why I share it as a part of my programs.
And thank you. If I may qualify something that I said before you answered this last question, um, I don't think I knew you had a brother when I started to interview Mr. Tolliver. That was about 2004. But certainly, he spoke very highly of every member of his household in
The
sharing his
notorious bragger.
very proud of his family. But I knew about you and Stephanie. Okay, I knew more about you than I did about your brother. Sounds like he was the baby of the
Yeah,
family.
he was the youngest.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Okay, thank you very much. And again, having spoken in an in-depth fashion about the place of the arts in your life and how you want to pay it forward and make sure that there's a place for the arts in the lives of your students, I'd like to talk now in this final section about the challenges associated with making art in the season of COVID-19 and in the ongoing struggle associated with the Black Lives Matter movement. How has your life as an artist and a teacher been impacted by COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter?
Well, it was definitely impacted by COVID when it hit, because it was ironically and sadly the what is it, centennial of the 19th Amendment being passed. And so Women in History had this big calendar full of dates to do suffragists and perform as Susan B. Anthony and Mary Church Terrell and Sojourner Truth and Ida B. Wells Barnett, all these women who were suffragists. And it all got canceled because everything shut down. So because we have the internet, some of it was salvaged, but it certainly wasn't, what we had planned. We, wanted to do these in-person performances of these women and celebrate women getting the right to vote. So that was a huge upender. That's minor compared to people dying and hospitals being overcrowded, but it changed everybody's life in some way. With Black Lives Matter, well, the tragedies that were virally shared, again, because of the internet, because the stuff had been happening forever, just the whole world didn't get to see it in real time the way we did during the, God rest his soul, George Floyd's murder and some of the other situations that led to the Black Lives Matter movement. The arts were crucial, I believe, for people to harness their anger, their grief, their frustration into something positive, but also impactful. Because when you see those murals of George Floyd, when you hear the songs that were written about, like by Kendrick Lamar, "We're Gonna Be All Right," and then the other play about the woman who, Antigone in Ferguson, the woman whose brother's body is left to rot after he's been executed, and whether she's going to leave it there or risk her own life to bury him properly. The arts gave a human, focused, compassionate way to say, this is wrong, it has to change, and a way to envision what change would look like, and a way to honor and validate what was wrong. Because, like Dr. King and other people have said, violence is the language of the unheard. But if you can create art that is seen and heard, it's not as necessary to react violently. You can act proactively. And arts feed the soul. And when you've been harmed, I mean, we were harmed. Anybody that had any compassion in their heart is harmed by seeing death and destruction, no matter where it is. And in order to keep your faith in a better tomorrow, in the hope that this can get better, this can be addressed, this can be fixed, what can we do? How do we do it? If you don't have the arts in there, if you don't have music, if you don't have some kind of expression, outlet, catharsis for people, it doesn't get better. People get sick, people get angry. All the horrors that arose during the pandemic of domestic violence and alcoholism and more drug abuse because of people's sorrow and people's frustration. But I have to believe, I know that some of more would have happened if it hadn't been for the arts, if people could not have found a positive way to express all of that emotion. And it is especially important for people who feel lost. Some of the best theater I've seen has been in Cleveland at I think it's the Y Haven project that the Cleveland Public Theater does with formerly incarcerated men. And another program that I saw for people who are in transitional housing, people who are at low points in their life, people who society has thrown away, when they're given the opportunity to express themselves artistically, it's a game changer. It changes people's lives. They also do outreach with, and I hate using the word, but underprivileged children, because that's a whole, yeah. But children who didn't have access to what I had access, private lessons at, esteemed institutions. Cleveland Public Theater, Caramoo, places like that, bring the theater to them, bring the theater to the people, and let them make their own theater. And then they see, I can do this too. That is a light. Michael Oatman doing it in Garden Valley, East Cleveland Theater. Oh gosh, I can't think of who else. But it shouldn't be something intimidating that's behind the walls of some brick building that you have to pay to get into. The art is in everybody. So it needs, as artists, we need to go to people who don't have access to $150 tickets to go see Hamilton and Playhouse Square. But I can go to a school and do one of the Black characters from that period, Phyllis Wheatley, the poet, who wrote poetry and she was a slave, and have the children make up poems about what freedom means to them. And they're artists at that. That's their artistry, and it's connected to history. And it's important. It's valid. It's important, and it's necessary. And the consequences of not doing it are not good. They're not good. They're not good. When I was growing up, there was all city orchestra, there was all city choir, there was all city band. Every child learned an instrument. Every child took art lessons. Every child, I'm thinking, now there probably were some schools where those things didn't happen because that was part of the, Black schools not being given the same, here in Cleveland, the same, things that other schools got. But I remember Christine Buster, who was a Caramoo dancer, coming to Dome and teaching us modern dance after school. And you couldn't tell us nothing when we put our little costumes on that we made. It just gives you something that is just as important as what you learn from books and sitting in the classroom with a teacher. Which the good teachers are creative too and inspire. Good teachers inspire creativity in their students. But to be able to do that, And the after school program, I know it changed some people's lives because I know the people and I know them now and I see the impact that it had on them. So, because they, like I said, they didn't get to get on the bus and go downtown to take ballet lessons. You know, their parents weren't in a position to do that for them and probably didn't even cross their minds to because Black children don't dance ballet. You know, there was that barrier too. Those aren't things that we do. That was the perception. So to have it come to you and somebody that looks like you is doing it, and the possibility at least now exists in your mind because you've seen it, so you know that it can happen.
Thank you very much. I know because you have been a student of history and now, like your parents, you're a history maker and an educator, that you come across these stories where there is resistance to, the opposition to public funding for the arts. And I'm thinking about the Federal Theater Project, you know,
Oh my
during the
God.
era of
Yes.
WPA. And
Yes.
more recently, during the lifetime of Robert Mapplethorpe, I mean, just
Hmm.
senators saying, you know, not one penny for the National Endowment for the Arts, and
Yeah.
start to question the National Endowment for the Humanities.
Yeah.
But again, here we are, still in this
Hmm.
era of COVID-19 and Black Lives Matter. And yeah, there are a lot of things that we have to address in our society to make this, can I borrow the spirit of the preamble to the Constitution? We the people have some
Hmm.
work to do in order to, you know, create this more perfect union. Should we be using tax dollars to support?
Absolutely. 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 Unequivocally. Because number one, as my friend Genevieve Mitchell pointed out, which I hadn't thought about, we all pay taxes. So people talking about I'm a taxpayer, therefore I get, you know, people that are on assistance or poor and getting quote handouts. Everybody that's ever that buys something in America is paying taxes because the taxes are included in the price of whatever you bought. So yeah, I'm going back to Dr. King. He has a quote where he says, a government that spends more on its military than it does on social services is soulless." I'm paraphrasing. I can't think of the exact quote, but we it's a no-brainer to me. You absolutely have to, because as I said, it is a part of the human experience to be an artist and produce art on some level, even if it's just singing around the table in your dining room at your house. That is art, that is music. And to say that it's not a part of a child's education is ridiculous. It's just ridiculous. And the problem comes in because artists are troublemakers. We produce art and music and dance and that questions and challenges and defies the status quo. And people don't want to hear that. It's just look at all the books that are being banned. But I don't subscribe to that. I think if what you believe is the truth is really true, then somebody can read something that's not what you believe and figure that out for themselves. It's not up to you to say you can't read this because it's not true. That's not your, you know, in a democratic society, I don't, that's dictating. And you certainly can add a disclaimer and say this does not subscribe to the beliefs and blah 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 of this particular group. But then the person's decision to read it and what they do with that is their business. And you're so afraid of losing control of people that you don't want them to have any thoughts other than the ones that you deem valid, authentic, and patriotic and moral. Then you're trying to control somebody else, and that's fear and control. And I truly believe that if people have access to more than one way of looking at something, that's better, because there is more than one way of looking at something. There always has been. So, and art is one way that those things, if you think this is wrong, give me a cogent, rational, calm explanation for why you think it's wrong, or even an angry explanation. But understand that I don't have to believe that. And I don't, that's my constitutional right to not agree with you, to free speech. There's some horrendous things being put on television and being played on the radio, and things that make my blood boil, things that make me cringe. And I really am like, I can't believe they're playing this, because it offends me and my sensibility and my moral compass. But it came out of something. And the bigger question is, why is this being produced and why is it selling? Not, I think something is wrong with it, but why is it happening in the first place? And what's at the root of this? That's the way I see it.
Oh, thank you very much. I've almost come to the end of my official list of questions, but I have to thank you for helping me to learn more about another great teacher in our midst. Turns out he was at the Western Reserve Historical Society on December 31st, 2022, during the Kuumba celebration for Kwanzaa 2022. And his name is Mr. Paul Hill.
Oh, Mr. Hill. Yeah.
Junior. And some of us are calling him Baba Hill. And the first time I heard that was during an interview that you conducted of Mr. Hill for 2020 virtual Kwanzaa celebration. And we were looking at the principle Nia. But it seems to me that Mr. Paul Hill, in addition to being Baba, to so many of us who are students of African American history and culture, that he's just a walking, talking teacher. What is it about him that makes his work so vital, to what it is that we're trying to do here in the city of Cleveland?
It's vital because he has done the work. He's done the work and has been doing it for decades. He has done the research, he has done the writing, he has done the traveling, he has done the hands-on work with children, with other educators, and he knows his stuff. And he's got not just wisdom, but the knowledge and the intellect. It has all of it. And foremost, the intention and the consciousness that this is important and it needs to be done. Because there's a whole lot of smart people that have learned a whole lot, but it doesn't go out of their head and impact anybody else. His whole modus operandi is, I'm doing this, plant seeds, and then to nurture those seeds and make sure that they grow into trees. And so it's very holistic. It's a whole circle. It's the learning, the sharing, the teaching, the studying, the in-depth investigation, the putting it to, what do you call it? To the test, testing these things to see if they work, to see if they're real, to see if they're true, finding out what works and what doesn't. And so he's done all that. So he hasn't left any stones unturned. And his life has been devoted to that. And it's rock solid. His knowledge is rock solid. His intention is very clear. His purpose is very clear. And his expertise is very clear. And most importantly, the compassion is very clear. And so he should be running the schools, or at least be the advisor or something, you know what I'm saying? Because he's done it all. Like I said, done it all and seen the rest. He's done it. He knows it, been there and done that, and he can tell you about it. And unfortunately, bureaucracies don't function in a way that people like him can have the impact that they should, but that's a whole nother story. But gosh, he's a treasure. He's a treasure. He's an absolute treasure. And in a perfect world, he would have a school system, a school that he could implement all the things that he's learned, and they would actually be done on a daily basis. And he did that through the East End Neighborhood Center and other places. So the work has been done.
I wanted to mention that interview that you conducted with Mr. Hill, because that's part of our digital archives. And your interview will be part of the digital archives of the Western Reserve Historical Society, especially the African American Archives Auxiliary. Now I got to thank you for your generosity. I'm going to go back and look for the email, but I was so pleased because I think it was in 2020. I'm pretty sure I was on the payroll at the Historical Society, and I started there in January 2020. But you sent me an email basically saying, okay, I just got married and I'm leaving town.
Yeah.
You know, would you be interested, right, in some of the documentary evidence related to the Tolliver family's history? And I'm paraphrasing, but I'll go get the exact quote from the email. Would I be interested? I have my carry-on luggage. I will meet you at the storage unit.
Yeah, you made it very clear in no uncertain terms of whatever you had to do to get it, you would get it. So.
And I must say also on that topic, and we're all quite happy, thank you very much, at the Western Reserve Historical Society, that you had the presence of mind to say, I'm leaving, but I'm not taking the entire treasure with me to North Carolina. We're going to share some of it.
No, I didn't bring any of it here. It belongs in Cleveland. It doesn't belong here. So yeah, it's Cleveland history. So, and my father had spoken with Sam Black, who was one of the directors of Quad A,
of the archives,
about doing that. And it was just me following through on what he had already, preordained. So, far be it from me, to so.
Well, thank you again for honoring your father's wishes. You didn't have to do that, but thank you for doing that. And may I just make one other important note? Certainly, I did have the pleasure of meeting you at the storage locker in Glenville, and putting some things in the carry-on luggage. And
yes, ma'am.
But just incredible. The hats, the suits, the wedding gown, those things that are quite frankly more I guess it would have been the responsibility of the curator of costumes. And I am not that person for the Western Reserve Historical Society, but certainly Patricia Edmondson, I think did a wonderful job of sharing part of the textiles related to the family's history, and displayed them so beautifully at the Historical Society, especially your mother's wedding gown during the Amanda Wicker show. But I wanted to say something else, because there were the article about Mr. Tolliver suing the police in the city of Cleveland, and calling that to the attention of the citizens of this great city of ours. That article was discovered by Patricia Edmondson, and she added that to the display, that and the black and white photograph that was there that did not come from your archives, but I believe Mr. Tolliver was speaking to an audience of students in Cleveland. But Patricia Edmondson, who is the costume curator, is the one who added that article. So I just wanted to say that as part of it. Thank you for giving me credit, but I don't deserve it.
Okay. I didn't know where it came from. I just was shocked to see it.
It was very important piece of evidence. Yeah. And reminding us also that you did this. Mr. Tolliver loved beautiful hats, right? And thank you for sharing that bit of history with us as well. That and the fancy suits, were important parts of, this gentle introduction to some of the other history that he had made here on
Mhm.
America's North Coast. Sharp dressing lawyer, singing lawyer, great father and husband, and so on and so forth, and a great educator as well, and school board member. But I have.
I wanted to mention just a couple more
Yes,
things too. That my mother and her brother John sang with Wings Over Jordan, and she also sang with the Cleveland Orchestra Chorus. And um, what was the other thing? I guess that was all. That was all. Yeah,
and that's pretty important.
yeah.
May I ask about the Opera Theater at Caramel House? Were your parents involved in that?
Yeah, true story. I was looking for something completely different. I mean, I knew about it because they told me about it, but I was looking for something in the Cleveland Public Library website. And as it so happened, because my ancestors do this all the time, I came across a program from Karamu, 1950, I think, that my father, an opera that he sang in by Carl Orff. I think it was a world debut of this orchestra. And so he was singing in it, and my mother did props or something for it. She wasn't cast in it. And there were there was two plays being done. Uh, One was based on a sermon by Zora Neale Hurston, who had briefly spent some time at Caramel working on a play with Langston Hughes. And then the second one was by Carl Orff, the composer who did Carmina Burana, that everybody knows. That's his most famous work. But anyway, I'd never seen this program. I didn't know anything about this. And so you can imagine my shock. I was like, oh, like that's my parents. So, Dorothy Greenwood and Stanley Tolliver. But this was the year that Caramel opened in the new facility, which isn't new now, but the building they have now is not the original Caramel. It was in the central area and it was in a house. So when they built this building, they had this huge grand opening season. And the next week was the debut of The Medium with Dr. Zelma Watson George. And my mother was in that opera with her. She had a very small part, but she was in the opera with her. And of course, Dr. George went on to be the first Black woman on Broadway to star in a colorblind casted show, because it wasn't written for a Black woman or about a Black woman. So just every time I look up, there's another connection that I didn't know about, like the picture I saw when I'm watching, Dr. Gates documentary. I'm like, that's my grandmother. How did she get on here? But that's what they do. They just show up. So that just keeps affirming for me that this is my charge, to tell these stories and write them down and preserve them. So
And thank you for the reminder, again, that this is an illustrated history that you're writing. And thank you for mentioning the Alan Cole photo. But can you tell us a little bit, since we own the Cole collection and materials from your family archives as well are part of the collections now at the Historical Society, the place of Alan Cole in your family's history and some other images of members of the family that we might come across if we go through the Cole collection.
There's another photograph, the same church, Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in the Mount Pleasant neighborhood. It's on 123rd, I think. There's a photograph of my mother and my grandmother in the senior choir. My mother was the pianist, the church pianist from the time she was 12 at Mount Olive. And it was not a happy experience for her. She felt like she was exploited because they always wanted her to rehearse and, this person and that person, and nobody ever paid her. And then when the church gave out a scholarship to go to college, they gave it to this young man who really hadn't done any service at the church. He was very smart, and they gave it to him because he was very smart. But my mother's like, I'm here on Wednesday, I'm here on Thursday, and I'm here on Sunday. And then we're like, well, he's a boy, he's going to get married and have a family, he has to support his family, so he gets the scholarship. And she was very, very unhappy about that. But she did serve as church pianist, and my grandmother was in the choir, and she was also a Sunday school teacher. And I did not know about the existence of that picture until I opened your book about Alan Cole and saw it in there. And again, they just showed up. And then later I found the picture in the attic, the actual photograph in the attic, but I had never seen it until I saw it in your book. But Alan Cole took my father's military portrait. He did my mother's engagement portrait. And there's another picture I know that's an Alan Cole. There's at least 3 Alan Cole pictures that my parents had taken.
Mhm. You know, and it's interesting for me still 10 years after the book was published, a little more than 10 years now. It's a 2012 publication with Kent State University Press. It's going to sound like a commercial, but please know, listeners, I don't get any royalties from this. The book was published in 2012, and it's through the lens of Alan E. Cole, a photographic history of African Americans in Cleveland, Ohio. And Sherrie, we have 30,000 negatives, over 6,000 prints right now in the Cole collection. And we don't know that we have everything related to his career here in Cleveland, but he just did an incredible job. And I'm not at all surprised that your family members were in that collection. But thank you for letting us know. It's another reason for us to continue to call attention to the collection and the important people whose lives are documented in that visual evidence, because we want to get the whole thing digitized and share it with the rest of the world. Now I must ask. It's one of the questions on the list. I almost forgot, you know, as I hurry to the end of the list. But how has travel impacted your life first as a student of the arts, and then as a teacher and an artist and a teaching artist? Because you mentioned New York, certainly talked a lot about Ohio, and also now talked about the fact that you're in North Carolina. But are there other, let's use this term, the members of the Toni Morrison Society, like a lot, are there other sites of memory that you would associate with those special chapters in your life story about being a teaching artist?
Yes, I had the opportunity to work as a teaching artist in Mobile, Alabama. And I had this wonderful epiphany when I was there about how to engage the students in what I was doing. I was portraying Madam C.J. Walker, the entrepreneur who was born in slavery and went on to create a $1 million business empire. And she was also a philanthropist and a social activist. That part of her life isn't that well known, but she was. And I had the children to explain to them how amazing her business was. I had everybody, I said, how many of you like to draw? And some of them raised their hand and said, you go stand over here. How many of you like music? You go stand over here. How many of you like to build things? I said, okay, for Madam Walker's business to exist, she needed plumbers, she needed painters, she needed drivers, she needed mechanics, she needed chemists, she needed typists, she needed printers, she needed people to make boxes and jars and bottles. All of that is encompassed when you see a business. She needed somebody to paint the walls, she needed somebody to build the desk, she needed somebody to put in the wires for the electricity to work. So everybody in here, if you all work together and used your strengths and things that you love, you could all create a business like that yourselves, because that's what it took. It wasn't just about her. The story isn't just about, and she knew that. She knew it wasn't just about her. She knew that if I build this business, I can employ a man who has a garage to fix the trucks that deliver my product. If I have a business, I can hire women to put labels on bottles and ship them out, and have a mailing system. And these are employment opportunities for people to do work that they like, and I can create an environment where they're not being mistreated as they probably would be because this was the turn of the century and Black people had very few rights and were not afforded very much dignity in the workplace. But here, she had a woman foreman in her factory. And so I tried to connect the dots for them to see that this was something that they created using their strengths, but also them working together. And that was a real aha moment for me. Like I said, I learned as much from them as they learned from me. I was like, you guys could recreate this yourselves. You totally could. If somebody likes to do hair, if somebody wants to be a rapper, rappers, wear costumes. Who likes to sew? Who likes to design? You could be his costumer. You could be his sound person. You could be his electrician. If you go to the show and all the lights are going off and somebody has to do that. That's a good paying job. Being a light board designer and a sound effects designer. So that's how those things come about. And I don't think when we were in school, we were given that big picture. It's very education kind of compartmentalizes things. Do you want to be a lawyer? Do you want to be a teacher? Do you want to be a doctor? But we're in an age now where people are being entrepreneurs and they are figuring this out. You know how to do this, you know how to do this, you know how to do this. Let's do this together and make something happen. Let's not keep knocking on doors, seeing who will let us in and pay us. Let's create our own job. Let's create our own business. Let's do what we do. And that's a huge shift. And it's not happening in academia, it's happening in grassroots of, in Glenville, if you had a rap record, you put a stereo in your car and you blasted it and you drove around. And when you went to the gas station, you sold those CDs out of your trunk. Right? Until you got on and they played it in the club. And then, that's all from the bottom up. That's not something that you learned at, Wharton MBA. It was hustling, So the light just went on for me that I could use the arts and use history to show students the power that they do have, because the world's always telling them you're underprivileged, you're a minority, you're poor, you're Black. It's always ask Paul Hill, he has a word for it. It's negative. The definition is always negative. But what we are is, hey, we can make chicken dinners on Friday and sell them, and get the rent money. We can have a car wash and raise enough money to get these labels, uniforms for this little dance team that we got. So that creativity and that ability to financially produce something that is beneficial to you and your community is there. It's there. So that was a game changer for me. Mm-hmm. That was a game changer for me.
Okay, well, thank you so much. And again, for the last question, I do this for all my oral history interviews. Okay. Sometimes I try never to ask the leading questions, mm-hmm. but this one's wide open. Is there anything else that you would like to say about the place of the arts in your life?
The arts are my life. The arts, nature, music is my life. Everything else comes out of that. To me, nature and art and music are all the same thing. It's just that that's my core. And I believe that learning about nature and the arts and connecting to nature and the arts is a fundamental part of education and becoming a human being. And that the objective of education is not to get enough skills to get a job, to work for somebody, but to be a whole person that has a full life experience, and that would include understanding that we are on an earth and is, you know, it we're not just here to look at a computer screen. We're here to look at the stars and the trees, and looking at the stars and the trees will stir art in you. It will stir music in you. It will stir dance and singing. This beautiful songs that we have, that we hear, and we're all inspired by people having experiences as human beings. The beautiful music that we have, the beautiful art that we have. The angry art and the angry music that we have now is coming out of lived experience too, you know? But it's, art is life, and life is art. I don't think I coined that, but that's just the way I feel.
Well, thank you again, Miss Sherrie Tolliver, for sharing this chapter in your life story with the A. Grace Lee Mims Arts and Culture Oral History Project at the Western Reserve Historical Society.